Hi everyone, welcome to today's broadcast. This webinar is being brought to you by the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership, also known as ESTAP. This project is managed by CISA. And our topic today is the recently announced Solar Plus Storage Microgrid project in Rutland, Vermont. And to begin with, I would like to go over a quick housekeeping slide. Today, all of our participants will be in listen-only mode throughout the broadcast, so we will not be able to hear you. You can connect to the audio portion of the webinar using your computer speakers or a headset, or you can listen in via telephone. We suggest that you listen in via your computer and avoid telephone charges, but if you are listening to us today by phone, we ask that you please enter the audio pin into your telephone keypad. You can find that by, it should be shown on your screen, or you can right-click on your name. This will allow us to keep track of you throughout the broadcast. And today we're encouraging all of our webinar participants to please type in your questions into the question box on your webinar console as you think of them. You can do this at any time during today's broadcast, and we will queue up all of your questions, and they'll be answered as time allows during following all of our presentations today. And this webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available to you on the Clean Energy States Alliance website at cisa.org/webinars. And with that, I would like to introduce Todd Olinsky-Paul. Todd is the project director for ESTAP, and he is going to introduce today's guest speakers and talk a little bit about ESTAP. Todd, please go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. Welcome to the webinar. This is Todd Olinsky-Paul. I'm the project director for the Energy Storage Program, ESTAP, of Clean Energy States Alliance. And Samantha, if you can just advance my slides, please. I'm going to start out by giving a big thanks to Dr. Emory Hook of the U.S. Department of Energy, Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability, who is also one of our guests on today's webinar and will be presenting information, and also Dan Borneo, who couldn't be with us today, from Sandia National Laboratories. Emory funds our energy storage program, and we're very thankful that he could be here today. Next slide, please. So just to give you a little background, ESTAP, our energy storage program, is a project of CISA. CISA is a nonprofit. We primarily work with states to help them better administer their clean energy funds, and we work with states all over the country. In the case of our energy storage program, this is a contract that we have with Sandia National Laboratories, and we have two primary activities under ESTAP. First is to disseminate information to stakeholders on energy storage, which we do through webinars such as this one, and also mailings and other conferences and so forth. And then also our second activity is to facilitate public-private partnerships at the state level to support energy storage demonstration project development. And what that really means is that we try to bring states to the table to partner with DOE and other stakeholders such as utilities, and put together energy storage projects that are actually deployed, and we're not just talking about program development but actual project development. Next slide, please. So I wanted to let everybody know that this webinar is being recorded, as all our webinars are, and will be posted on our website. If you would like to review it at a later date or send a link to somebody else who wasn't able to be here today to take a look at it, you can do so by going to the Clean Energy States Alliance website. Under Projects, find the Energy Storage Technology Advancement Partnership. Go to this page that you see on your screen. On the left, you'll see there's a red arrow pointing out where our webinar archives link is located. And all the webinars from over 2 years of monthly webinars are in this web page, and you can go back and review them. You'll get both the audio and the video for the webinars. Also, if you'd like to be notified of future webinars and other information, sign up for our listserv. There's a red circle around the button for that, so you can locate it on our website easily. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So we have several speakers today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce them now at the beginning with brief bios, and then we will proceed with the actual presentation. Our first speaker will be Dr. Emory Hook, the Energy Storage Program Manager in the DOE Office of Electricity Delivery and Energy Reliability. Dr. Jacques holds a BS from Fordham University. He conducted graduate work at Brown University on superconductivity, received a PhD in theoretical particle physics from Purdue, and following some years as a professor at universities, he joined the Department of Energy to manage the thermal and physical storage program. For the past decade, he's directed the Electrical Energy Storage Research Program in the Office of Electricity, which funds work on a wide variety of technologies, including advanced batteries, flywheels, supercapacitors, and compressed air energy storage. Applications include seamless continuity of power supply for high-tech industry during outages, making renewables dispatchable, and helping to increase the capacity factor and ease congested distribution lines. Emory also supervises the $185 million ARRA stimulus funding for grid-scale energy storage demonstrations, developing a portfolio of field-tested storage technologies, and he is an internationally recognized expert on storage technology. We're very happy to have him with us today. We also have Darren Springer, the Deputy Commissioner of the Vermont Public Service Department. He previously was a Senior Policy Advisor on Energy and the Environment and Chief Counsel for Senator Bernie Sanders, as well as a former Program Director of Energy and Transportation at the National Governors Association Center for Best Practices.
Todd, it sounds like we may have lost you. Todd, can you hear us? All right, sorry everyone. Todd has a poor connection online right now.
Great, this is Maria. I'll
Director of
take over.
Operations
Oh,
for the
he's
Reserve
back.
Fund in New York City.
Todd, this is Maria. You
Yes?
clipped out for just a moment, so could you start back about a minute from where you left off? You, we went blank on your audio.
Sure.
We
Where did I leave off?
We got through Darren, I
Okay.
think.
Okay. So in addition to Dr. Jacques and Darren Springer, we have Mary Powell, Chief Executive Officer of Green Mountain Power. She's been with Green Mountain Power since 1998, has previous experience as a business owner and in business management at the executive level in both the public and private sectors, and was recognized by Fast Company magazine in 2004 as one of the top 50 business leaders in the United States for her work leading the reinvention of a traditional utility company. And finally, we have Jacques Castengay, also of Green Mountain Power. He's the Director of Generation and Renewable Innovation, and he's been there since 2005, has served in former positions at GMP, including Lead Engineer and Field Operations Leader. So those are our four speakers for today, and we are going to start off with Dr. Jacques. Before introducing him, I would like to remind everybody to please go ahead and type in your questions as they occur to you. I will be collating those during the presentations, and at the end of all the presentations today, we will ask our panel to answer those questions and discuss other issues that you may find of interest. And we have 124 people logged on to this webinar at this point, so please don't delay. Send in your questions because we may not get to them all, and it would be helpful to have them early. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Jacques.
Well, hello. This is Emory Hook at the Department of Energy, and I run the Energy Storage Program at the Office of Electricity. And today I would like to talk about partnering with the states on energy storage. In actual fact, we have been working in the states, but not with the states. We have quite a number of installations which we have supported through the ARA storage program under the Recovery Act. Examples are a unit of 500 kW in New Mexico, connected with PV. In Texas, a 36 megawatt facility connected with wind. More recently, we have a facility in California, 250 kilowatt for peak shaving, and just about finished 20 megawatt for frequency regulation in Pennsylvania. All of these facilities have different applications and different technologies. The ARA program is going towards completion. Projects are finishing up, and we will be analyzing the projects. So what is the next direction we should be moving? Well, we noticed that states are beginning to provide incentives for storage and getting involved in the field. For example, California with a 1.3 gigawatt mandate, Hawaii with 200 megawatt storage solicitation, and New York offering $2,100 per kilowatt during peak periods. So obviously there is interest among the states, but they tend to be only a few states. What we are trying to do in our DOE state initiative for storage is to partner with many states and develop effective local projects for grid energy storage. Well, the first of these is actually Vermont. And in Vermont, we are partnering on a resilient microgrid projects. Now, the background of it is that if you notice, if you look at the average temperatures in Washington, D.C., you can see that there's a clear trend. If you look at the number of natural disasters exceeding $1 billion in damages by year, you see a similar trend. And it indicates that the situation will get worse, not better. Typically, you get situations like this result of Tropical Storm Irene in Vermont. It was a very considerable disaster affecting many cities in Vermont and causing huge amounts of damage. Well, experience shows that every $1 spent on protection measurements ahead of time can prevent $4 in repairs after a storm. We also note that some 50% of diesel generators failed to start during the Sandy emergency. So just slapping a diesel generator is not necessarily going to keep you from being out of electricity during a disaster. The approach we are following is to have microgrids with both renewable energy and storage. And these can provide essential services over an extended time period. Notice it says essential services. It doesn't mean business as usual, but at least there will be enough electricity to provide light, to provide heating if necessary, to provide communication, and what have you. Now, this is during emergencies. During non-emergency periods, the microgrid will provide demand management for the user and compensated services to the grid. So it works both during emergencies and in non-emergency periods. And you can, in principle, stick those any place, apartment buildings, campuses, schools, shopping centers, and so on. But in particular, and this is the example here, community centers for emergency that can be independent in case of an electricity shutdown. So our project is a joint project with Vermont Public Service Department and Green Mountain Power. Vermont Public Service issued the solicitation. There is joint funding by Vermont Public Service, DOE, and Green Mountain Power. Green Mountain Power providing the majority of the funding. And the project is going to be in Rutland, Vermont. It's going to involve 4 megawatts of storage for 3.4 megawatt hours, and it will be integrated with 2 megawatts PV. And the integrator will be Dynapower. Well, we've had our groundbreaking on August 12th. You notice Mary Powell on the left, the mayor, myself, and Todd Olinsky at the groundbreaking. It is fantastic to have brought together all the relevant agencies and actors in Vermont and have them work ahead to finish this project. It has a lot of interesting features. For example, it's situated on a brownfield area. And it will, of course, provide ancillary grid services, peak shavings during high load periods, and the system can be islanded to provide emergency power for a resilient microgrid serving a high school emergency center. Among the other interesting facilities will be an innovative power electronics setup that will be provided by Dynapower. Now, Vermont is only the first one in the series of projects. The other one, which is also well underway by now, is with the Washington State Clean Energy Fund. And they have come up with a solicitation for $15 million for utility energy storage projects. The selected projects are with Uni Energy Technology and the vanadium system. The two utilities are Snohomish PUD and Avista, and in all these cases it's vanadium technology. And PML is providing the project with benefit optimization studies. So the value of the installation will be developed through programs which were developed at the Pacific Northwest Laboratory. We also involve universities, University of Washington and Washington State, respectively. And after that, we have an Oregon State initiative. We start with the Oregon PUC and the Oregon Department of Energy. We have started the workshop March 22nd in Portland, which was well attended. We have turned out an energy storage pilot project request for comments. This was turned out by the Oregon Department of Energy, and we are now soliciting comments on such a project. And the RFP by the Oregon Department of Energy is in preparation. So come fall, this project too will go ahead. And we're looking forward to working with other states and getting other projects underway. The Grid Energy Storage State Initiative is proving to be an effective mechanism in creating interest, initiating projects, and providing technical and analytical support. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Jacques. I want to turn now to Darren Springer from the Vermont Department of Public Service, who will talk a little bit about the state's role and put the project in context, it's very important to understand how this project serves the needs of the state and also the city of Rutland. So I'm hoping that Mr. Springer can give us some information about that.
Thank you, Todd, and thanks for having me on. And want to start off by just saying thank you to Emory and to Mary Powell and others who were partners in making the project happen. From the Public Service Department and the state's perspective, we were involved in two ways. First, from a regulatory perspective in helping to support the project through its permitting phase with the Public Service Board. And then secondly, through the Clean Energy Development Fund that is run within the Public Service Department, contributing to the energy storage piece in a complementary way, as well as DOE had in a much more significant way to make that happen. And in terms of Vermont, the state has a goal in the Comprehensive Energy Plan of 90% renewable energy by 2050 and a number of goals that are in between now and then. And this is the first significant, really kind of grid-scale energy storage project that we have in Vermont. So it's going to be a very important demonstration from a technology perspective and a learning perspective. There's no better utility than GMP to take on the challenge, since they've been incredibly innovative in this space, and in Rutland in particular have made a focus of making Rutland a kind of energy test bed for the future, doing all kinds of interesting things there. The project itself, from a state perspective, is ideal in a number of ways. We've quadrupled or maybe even quintupled the amount of solar on the grid in Vermont just in the last several years. Real explosion of solar from net metering and other programs and utility investments as well. And so this fits within that context, but also it's from a land use and an aesthetic perspective, it's located on a landfill, so it's using a site that would not otherwise be utilized for a productive economic purpose necessarily. And so that was a real plus when you look at it from a permitting perspective. And so being a part of meeting that 90% by 2050 goal, being cost effective for the utility and actually providing value to customers, and then from the energy storage piece, being able to provide power in the event of an emergency to the emergency shelter, which is the local high school near the site, so that in the event of an outage, you'd have power at that facility, are all really innovative and practically useful aspects of the project that made it very easy for the Department of Public Service to support it in the permitting phase. And the other exciting thing, I think, from our perspective was that not only was Green Mountain Power involved and Grow Solar, which is a Vermont solar company, involved in this solar project, but Dynapower, which is a Vermont company as well that does a lot of work on controls, integrated controls for these types of storage systems. They spoke at the groundbreaking and talked about having done projects all around the country, but not having yet done one in Vermont, and so this was their first major project of this scale in Vermont, so that was an exciting aspect as well. So just to sum up, we were incredibly proud to have the project move forward in Vermont, and very appreciative of the Department of Energy for supporting the project, and happy to be a partner, and thank you, Todd, for having me on the webinar.
Okay, and thank you, Darren. We want to hear more about the project itself. Is Mary Powell on the line yet?
I am. Yeah, it's wonderful to be participating in this. Thank you.
Excellent. So, Mary Powell, the Chief Executive Officer of Green Mountain Power, we're going to see some slides in a moment about the project, but can you give us some more context about Green Mountain's role and other plans for Rutland?
Sure. In fact, what I'd like to first do is thank you, Todd, as well as the Department of Energy and Emory and Dynapower and Solar Power and the Department of Public Service and the City of Rutland, because really, like most great things in life, you only get them done through collaboration and working with tremendous partners. So we really feel honored to be to be able to bring this kind of project to Vermont, and we never would have been able to do it without those incredible partners. You've already heard a lot of wonderful things about the project. You know, what I think the texture I could probably add would really be around helping folks understand how this is such a key part of our vision for the future for our customers, which, you know, we launched an energy vision back in 2008, which was about really essentially getting to a very clean, green, cost-effective future. And we did a lot of major moves to move us that way, really kind of focused more on a portfolio perspective, a power portfolio perspective. And what has happened over the last couple of years is we really have become attached to the notion that the best way to get to a clean, green, cost-effective future for Vermonters and really candidly for the nation is to move in terms of embracing a lot of new and emerging technologies and figuring out, you know, what I keep saying is we innovate in the context of, you know, we're not the company, the R&D company that's coming up with these technologies. We're innovating through being the fast implementers of technologies that are emerging to provide customers with, you know, a very economical future, but one that is much greener and cleaner than the existing one. So we really are moving in the space of, as you know, creating this Rutland, which has been an outstanding partner as the energy city of the future, where we're really going to be demonstrating the value of bringing together solar energy, other forms of renewable energy, new technologies. We're going to be moving a lot into other spaces like electric vehicles and other new and emerging solutions for a grid that looks very different in the future than the one that we have today. So, you know, we hope this is one really big, bold step in the right direction, and it's really just one of many projects that we're going to be doing to transform the city of Rutland and work collaboratively with Darren Springer and others on helping the state achieve its goal around being really a fast mover towards a very different future. So just really thrilled to be part of this. You know, Josh has been instrumental over here at Green Mountain Power in making this kind of innovation and many others happen. So I really think it would be great to hear from him in terms of more specifics on this project and why it was so appealing as part of creating this energy city of the future.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Mary. I hope you can stay with us. We have a lot of very, very good questions already, and I think there are some that you'll want to address. I'm going to turn now to Josh Castengay of Green Mountain Power to give us the project specifics before we move on to the questions.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Thanks, Mary. And you know, I echo exactly what Mary said. I mean, in order to get this done from the get-go, it was a huge collaboration between the state, the department, DOE, Dr. Emory, PSD, Dynapower, GROW, and Rutland. So, what I think I was going to do, what I'll do is just give a little more detail on the project itself. This is the Stafford Hill Solar Storage Project. We got a few slides here just to kind of tick through, but you know, again, Todd, as you get questions too, feel free to jump in. And I think, is someone forwarding the slides for me? All right, thank you very much. So bottom line is this actually started as a solar project, right? So GMP had focused on Rutland as an area where we wanted to develop, we wanted to create the solar capital of New England. And simply put, it was going to be the highest amount of solar per capita of any city in New England. So we started to look at ways, okay, we want to develop solar. There's some GMP will build and own. There's some that others will build and own. Then we started to look at where does it make sense to develop solar, and this landfill was just a natural fit. It was large enough to handle a few megawatts of solar. It was in the city. It had no other real value for development. It had been capped for, I think, 20 or 30 years, so its methane production had dropped off, so you couldn't actually tap it for any kind of methane production. So we started with focus on developing solar at this site. As that progressed, as we started developing, we had always been encouraged at looking into developing some other ideas around the storage side. And initially, we weren't really focused on that at this project until the DOE and the state of Vermont kind of came in with the RFP and said, you know, we'd really love to see an opportunity of pairing up solar with some storage. And GMP and Dynapower had been working together on a few smaller projects, and it was sort of a natural fit. So we got together, put in a proposal, and here we are today. So the project sort of morphed from just the kind of basic standard solar project into this solar storage project on a site that, again, had really no other value. You can hit the next slide, please. So we sort of looked at it in kind of two value streams, right? We have the solar itself, and then we have the storage itself, and the third really is the combination of the two. So the solar PV just naturally has benefit for GMP's customers. It provides energy at times when it's needed most, around peak times. There is RECs that are generated from the project. It supports capacity needs in the region. It helps reduce our transmission costs for capacity, along with other ancillary services. We can go ahead to the next one, and I think we'll get into the storage piece. So we looked at, all right, how much room do we have? What makes sense to fit with this project? And working with Dynapower and a few others, we came up with this solution where it was about 4 megawatts of storage, and utilizing Dynapower's, what they call their multi-port inverter. So what that does is it allows you to connect the storage and the solar into the same inverter. Instead of, in some instances, you might see multiple inverters. There's a little bit of loss there with efficiency. This actually uses the same piece of equipment to connect both. And that has a number of benefits. The biggest being, one of the big ones we see is just being the control. So we can, as the solar is ramping up, you can smooth out the production from the solar using the storage. You can backfill. You can charge the batteries at certain times. There's a central control that can actually run the whole thing and really optimize it. We actually also went with two different battery technologies, the lithium and the lead. And the reason there, again, was to try to see how many different value streams can we extract from this project. The lithium and lead kind of both have their strong points. They can complement each other, and they can do totally different things, from taking part in ISO's frequency regulation market to providing benefit during peak times. As the peak in Vermont moves later into the day, where solar starts to drop off a little, the battery can support on that end too. And then lastly, one of the most exciting pieces is the ability to island or create this microgrid where we can carry this emergency shelter indefinitely with the solar and the storage, and hopefully we can look to expand that into other critical infrastructure. So next slide, please. So we should have a caption here to come up with a name of what kind of animal this thing looks like, because it looks like a seahorse or a Pegasus or something. I can't tell, but when we did the overview of the solar, it's a pretty unique shape. So you can see that this is all the landfill area here, and you can see the track and the high school off to the left. You can see the little black boxes up to the top. Those are the storage containers. So there's 4 containers that house the lithium ion with the inverters, and 4 containers that house the lead acid batteries. And then there is the step-up transformer that will take everything and put it up onto the grid. So it's about 2.5 megawatts DC of solar on this landfill, and 2 megawatts of storage. We can go to the next slide, please. So this is, I think I mentioned some of these already, but some of the value streams that we're testing here, there's regulation services, and again, that's sort of the frequency regulation. ISO has a pilot market that we will take part in around frequency regulation. There is capacity, transmission value, simple energy arbitrage, which is, if peak prices are really high and off-peak are really low, you can charge and discharge at opportune times to take advantage of that. And And then the grid resiliency piece. I mean, there's a big value in providing really clean, high level of power quality to an area. And one of the things we're looking at here is, you know, we don't want to be limited as to how much renewable energy we can deploy in the distribution system. So we need to figure out what are the things we need to do to not have a ceiling on that, to allow for as much distributed generation as makes sense into the system. Doing this project is going to show us what we can do, how we can smooth and ramp and do all those sorts of things to allow for a greater level of penetration on the distribution system. Next slide, please. Maybe that was it. Is that the last
Sorry,
one?
I think that was your final slide.
Okay, yeah, I thought so. So it's in a real brief, the project itself. Our goal, I mean, what we'd love to do, and we're scoping now, is how do we actually look at some distributed energy storage assets as well, and actually aggregate them to act similar to a project like this, but maybe be more spread out among the distribution system. So those are some of the things we're looking at in the future.
Okay, thanks very much. So that's the project in a nutshell, and we have a lot of great questions, as I said, so I'm going to start throwing these questions to our presenters. If you feel that you can address them, please do, and we'll get to as many as we can. So the first question, what are the rules of thumb of the relationship between size of renewable generation and size of storage? The storage in the project is twice the size of the PV array. Is this typical?
All right, I can take that, Todd. I think there, as far as this project, because we wanted to try the two different technologies, we have more storage than we do solar in this case, because we want to see where the values overlap or where they're completely separate between the lithium and the lead. From a utility standpoint, GMP standpoint, I think it would depend. I think the answer is it depends on what your goal is. If you're just looking to optimize the integration of the renewables, then doing your studies will tell you how much storage do you need to make sure you maintain a smooth profile. If you're looking to really cut peak demand on load, then you're really going to want to look at how much can I size and how much peak do I want to reduce at any given time. One makes sense. So it's probably a case-by-case basis. In this case, we really wanted to try to test out every value stream that's possible and find out where they conflict and where they complement each other.
I can make a remark on that too. It depends very much on the application. If you just want to smooth out things a bit, then up to 20% of storage is a good rule of thumb. If you really rely on your renewable, the PV, because you have a lot of it on the grid, and if it isn't operating, then you've got a big gap. In that case, you may want to back it up with equal parts. If you want to provide other grid services for the storage, then you can have, well, any amount of storage on its own, whether it backs up your renewables or not.
Okay, great. Another questioner wants to know if you can speak to the financial viability of the project. Does integrating storage with PV actually pay for itself with peak demand savings, or is it primarily in place for resiliency and public safety?
No, there definitely is an economic benefit to that as well. The way we looked at the project originally was with the solar itself, which was cost beneficial for customers on its own. Then adding the storage, we looked at, okay, what are the tangible and intangibles, and some of those intangibles, although they definitely have an economic impact and benefit, is the grid resiliency side. The actual revenue streams, the savings on transmission on peak, the the frequency regulation market, those are all things that provide a revenue stream actually through the storage project. There's because the frequency regulation market is pilot and it's brand new, there's a little bit of uncertainty on exactly what that will return. So that's big part of this project is exploring that to see what actually comes out of that. We have a very good sense of what this will do to help us on the transmission and the peak side of things.
Okay, good. And a similar or related question. Can you address the way the project is structured and financed? Does the utility get the ITC and depreciation?
We do, yeah. In this case, this was all with the grant contribution from the DOE and the state of Vermont. The remainder is all financed from Green Mountain Power, and we do take the ITC and depreciation as well.
Great. And for those who don't know, ITC is the Federal Investment Tax Credit for renewables. Another question, how complicated and expensive was it to add the ability to island the high school?
It actually, it doesn't add, the only additional capital cost there is just physically connecting the thing you want to island. So in this case, the high school is right adjacent to the landfill, which made it a natural fit. They have the emergency shelter, so pretty minimal. And then as far as the complexity, Dynapower, who's our partner on developing the control system, it's actually something they have quite a bit of experience with in some other instances on other actual islands outside of the United States. And so they've developed a program that can run everything, keep the system smooth and stable while you're just running off of renewables and energy storage. So more complex than I could ever explain, I'm sure, but Dynapower has perfected that control system.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question about the effects of the project on transmission and planning. Could the project lend itself to consideration as a non-transmission alternative as that term is defined for purposes of FERC Order 1000?
Sure. I'm not sure if I'm fully, I know what non-transmission alternatives in Vermont are, and I assume that's probably pretty aligned with FERC 1000, but the answer is absolutely. It can, if you have a deficiency, like in this area, we actually do have a gap as the team is studying, if load grows, although load growth has been pretty minimal, but if certain things happen, we might have, say it's 10 megawatts of a gap that if we don't find somehow, we could have to build transmission or do some other major infrastructure. A project like this, with a couple megawatts of storage, a couple megawatts of solar, goes a long way to filling that need. So yes, absolutely, this could be counted towards non-transmission alternative.
Okay, here's a question from someone who's identifying themselves as a devil's advocate. It says clouds may block out sunlight for days. Define provide extended services. Define to provide extended service. Also, what will the distribution system be used for? If poles and transformers are out of service, batteries cannot deliver energy. So a couple devil's advocate questions here. How do you define extended service? How do you deal with long periods of clouds and possibility of poles and transformers being down?
Sure. So it's important to note that just having clouds doesn't mean your solar goes to zero, right? So there's everything in between pitch black up to a beautiful sunny day, and so you're still producing some amount of energy out of the solar project even as clouds roll through. And the way we looked at this with the storage and the solar and the size of what the emergency shelter is from a load perspective is it takes that into account, because you're going to have, it is Vermont. Fortunately, it's not beautiful sunny every day. We're going to have clouds, a snowstorm, something like that roll through. The system needs to be designed to roll through some of those. So that's, it's just important to remember you're still producing solar even when you do have cloudy day rolling through. On the distribution side, that's, as we think we're kind of, as we look at the macro level of the transmission system where we start, if you have an issue on the bulk system, you could lose an entire, excuse me, you could lose an entire city, right, or an entire area of the state by just losing a few key transmission lines. At the distribution level, there's a lot more sort of redundancy. So the chance of losing everything all at once, it would be a lot more difficult than losing some key transmission lines. So the way we look at this is, it's sort of from a resiliency standpoint, it's a protection against those bigger system outages. And that being said, even if you lose part of the distribution system, there are ways. Part of what we're doing in Rutland as well around this microgrid is having ways to automatically feed and backfeed and refeed things from different directions. So you could lose sections of distribution and still maintain continuity there.
Okay, thanks. Here's a question for Mary Powell. Why Rutland?
Great question. And the answer is really simple, which is we really believe in terms of creating the energy city of the future, we couldn't find a better place in Vermont or New England for that matter because of a few things. One is when we first started, as Josh said, talking about making Rutland the solar capital of New England, a part of the benefit of doing it in Rutland is that from a grid perspective, it was the area that made a lot of sense in terms of an area where we probably through our work could help contribute to producing a non-transmission alternative. So in other words, the value of doing solar in Rutland versus some other part of the grid was greater to the system. So, and I think in fact solar in Vermont in general has contributed to the delay or postponement of some transmission projects because of the production profile of solar. Then what happened is we started working with Rutland on that goal, and we started also really looking a lot at emerging technologies, really thinking about the work around resilience, around sustainability, and got thinking that the other really important attribute of Rutland could be very helpful, and that attribute is there's a lot of awesome communities. Certainly there are a lot in our state. I'm sure there are in all states. But one of the attributes we really liked about Rutland is it seemed to be of the size that it could really mobilize and help us get things done. So it was really an attitude of how to do something, not an attitude of seeing it was sort of seeing all the opportunities before seeing all the problems. So that, I would say, it was a community that again really wanted to get things done from a leadership perspective. There were a lot of great community organization groups in Rutland that wanted to work with us and partner with us. So that is really important, and it makes your work easier. And then lastly, I would say the other interesting thing we thought is, when you geo-target a lot of work like this, you get to understand it and study it in ways that are much harder when you're doing sort of an interesting project over here and then another one 50 miles away and then another one 100 miles away. One of the things we really wanted to get the value of was, again, having all of these things happening in one part of the grid, one part of the state where we could really be able to understand better the benefits and the opportunities and the challenges. So we're going to be doing a lot of other projects. We already are in some other parts of Vermont. But again, in terms of creating the energy city of the future, it felt like the work we started there with the solar capital just led us naturally into much broader and deeper work around how to work on what we see as being the future of the delivery of energy.
Okay, so here's a related question, I think, given all that. The question is, what advice do you have for other communities seeking to emulate your project?
Well, I would say the most important thing is to find out who your strategic partners are, because as we talked about at the beginning, I think all of us actually who spoke really emphasized you know, the strength of partners and the strength of collaboration. So, you know, Green Mountain, we can't do this by ourselves. I mean, the Department of Energy, they can't do it by themselves. The Department of Public Service can't do it by themselves, and neither can Dynapower or Grow Solar. So I would say for any community that wants to embark on valuable, interesting projects that I think in this case also, I should add, will lead to tremendous socioeconomic change and vibrancy as part of their economic strategy and their environmental strategy for the future, should, in my mind, first identify who are the folks to bring to the table and how can they keep them at the table and collaborate to make these kinds of opportunities happen.
Okay, thank you. A related question for Dr. Jacques. What's the process for a state that would like to pursue a similar project, and what criteria does DOE use to decide what projects to support? Are there considerations that would make you feel a microgrid would be inappropriate?
Well, first of all, we are happy to work with any state, and in fact with other entities as well. Limitations, of course, are availability of funds, and well, some suggestions may be better than others. But many of these projects that we are involved in, and there are other states that I haven't mentioned, we have used the Clean Energy States Alliance as a sort of first cut connection. We also have people in Sandia and Borneo, for example, and we are willing to look at any state and give a rough evaluation of how well a partnership would work.
Okay, thank you. I would add that I don't know what state the questioner is from, but if you want to investigate further, you know, possibilities for a collaborative project in your state, feel free to get in touch with me at Clean Energy States Alliance. We will have a slide at the end. Actually, there it is now, with my email address and our website. Okay, we have several questions about the projected costs of this project, the overall cost and breakdown, how much do the batteries cost, you know, sort of what are the different, what's the cost breakdown and what is the project going to look like overall?
Sure. This is Josh at GMP. So as I mentioned before, the project was sort of split into two components, the solar portion and the storage portion. So from an all-in capital cost perspective for everything, it was, we're right around, I think, 10 or 11 million. The storage makes up about 5 million of that, and that includes the containers, the power inverter equipment, and that's before any of the tax incentives or any of the grant proceeds from the DOE. So that gives you, I mean, I think storage is roughly around $1 million a megawatt, I want to say, is kind of the average price we've seen for kind of an all-in storage solution right now, if that helps.
Okay. The financial viability of the project, how dependent is it upon the electric structure in the state? In other words, whether the state is deregulated and whether utilities can own and sell capacity?
It's a good question. So you're asking, is there a difference whether or not you're in a regulated state versus a deregulated state?
Yeah, I would say, I think
Well, I think that, yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Okay, well, I was just say, Todd, that I think, you know, certainly for us, what we have really found in Vermont is that the regulated structure, I think, works to the advantage of our customers. And certainly having Green Mountain owning the project on their behalf, and as you cited, or as the question cited, getting all the benefits that would come with it, the capacity benefits, et cetera, all of that flows straight through to our customers. You know, though I would think that it would be logical that if the project makes sense, it could still make sense in a different construct for whoever develops it, because it would have some of the same benefits and attributes. But it could be that because we're fully regulated and we have responsibility, you know, all the way through the system, that there could be certainly some benefits in terms of our speed of analysis, our ability to see the benefit to our customers and to move it forward.
Okay, thank you. A question about energy arbitrage and load shifting. This seems to be valuable to the grid. The question is, what will it take for time of use rates and therefore the opportunity for revenue from this sort of thing to happen in the Northeast?
So from, you know, when GMP owns it and deploys like this project, it's based on more of the wholesale price of power, right? So we look at and typically in the Northeast, although in the wintertime is changing that, but there isn't a huge spread on the wholesale price between the on and the off peak, except for some key days. Although again, in the winter, as we've seen this past winter, that gap is getting larger. If you're on the customer side, which I think is what you're asking, I mean, GMP has time of use rates now. So there's customers. There's a few different types of rates, whether you're an industrial customer, commercial customer, and depending on you know, the rates will have the price for energy as well as the price for demand, and storage can be a solution to help there with some kind of, you know, demand response, controllable storage. You can reduce your demand, which then leads to reducing your demand charge or your cost for your demand, and you can also run it during your on-peak times, which will have an energy value. So, I mean, they're already in Vermont, as I'm sure in most territories, there's already time of use rates in effect where this would be helpful.
Yeah, it varies. Yes, go ahead.
I'd like to add to that that we have to remember that the whole picture of monetization and the regulatory structure having to do with storage is still very much in flux and is developing almost as we speak. And every successful example contributes to the pool of information that can be used for future regulatory change. Example in point was frequency regulation, where we first had to build a sizable plant that showed that it could technically be done, and then FERC decided to put on a specific tariff which basically increased the value of storage for this service by a factor of 2. And you know, we have very little in terms of monetization of resiliency at the moment, and all of these things are yet to happen.
Thank you. I wanted to also add that the rate structure does vary, obviously, from state to state. I believe Massachusetts just recently came out with an order that will require utilities in that state to move from a flat rate to a variable time of use rate. So things are changing. States are re-examining pricing structures for the grid, and as Dr. Jacques noted, FERC is moving in response to the technological advances and potential market advances that exist for energy storage. A couple of questions on the Energy City of the Future vision. Could people want to know more about that? Is this the only project? Are there other projects in the works for Rutland? Where can they learn more about the Energy City of the Future vision and projects?
Great question. So it is, yes, the answer is there are a number of other projects that we're thinking about and talking about. Some of them are similar projects to this. So we're looking at really the whole city and how to really transform it from a grid perspective. So that you're going to hear a lot more of that type of project being proposed and going forward. We also have a whole suite of partnerships that we're exploring and going to be probably making some announcements in the next month or so about partners who really want to help create the energy city of the future in the context of transforming, as I said, the electric vehicle infrastructure. We're also doing a really neat project around creating what we're calling the energy homes of the future, where we're helping. Our goal now is 100 different homes in this very small city to transform to air source heat pump technology, extreme weatherization, efficiency, solar installation, and we also want to incorporate electric vehicles and utilize on-bill financing to help the transformations happen. We're also talking about doing that with small businesses. And we've also got some interesting new technologies that customers can use in terms of better understanding and utilizing the energy from their homes and their businesses. So I would say stay tuned. Great question on where can you get comprehensive information. It will be soon on our website, but I don't think now we yet have those plans uploaded.
Okay, thanks, Mary. I just want to check in with our presenters. It is a few minutes after 2. We do have a number of questions remaining. Is everybody okay to stay on the webinar for another few minutes to try to get to some of these questions?
Yeah, Todd, it's Mary. I unfortunately cannot. I've got to bow out. I've got a 2 o'clock appointment.
Okay.
I have another few minutes, Todd.
So do I.
Okay, very good. Well, we'll say thank you very much to Mary Powell, and also I believe Darren Springer had to leave a little earlier for another commitment as well, but we still have Dr. Jacques and Josh Castengay on the call to respond to remaining questions, and we'll just stretch time a little bit in order to do that. So, several questions about the batteries in particular, the type of battery, the manufacturer, where are they from, why is there a combination of 2 different types of batteries, why the specific amount of storage. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I think I can hit most of those. So let's see here. The battery. So again, it's a combination of lead acid and lithium ion. We actually use Dynapower as our sort of our procurement group as well for the batteries. So they went out to bid. The lead acid batteries came from Enersys. The lithium ion, actually, it's a good question. I can't recall exactly where those came from. I'll have to check with Dynapower, Todd, and I could provide you that info. They put them out to bid and get the whole package. And why the reason for the 2 different technologies? Again, for us, it's around this kind of demonstration idea. What are the different value streams that you can receive from these different technologies? They each kind of have their own characteristics, whether it be a quick, fast, kind of like a frequency regulation market looks for really quick kind of charge, discharge characteristics. So not real deep draws, but just kind of fast every few seconds calling on the batteries to do something. The lithium ion is a little more tuned to that, while the lead acid can go through some deeper cycles and provide some greater benefit on the peak reduction. And then they both can play in the microgrid islanding portion of the project. And so our goal is we actually, I mean, GMP has, every substation of GMP's has a full lead acid battery bank in it. So all of our subs, probably like most utilities, can run the entire substation on a battery setup for at least a day, usually longer. So as we learn more about what we can do with the lead acids, we're going to look at if we can do more with lead acids at our substations. Or as we learn with lithium ion, maybe we say, it may make sense to start using lithium ion at different locations and get other value streams there. So it's Dr. Jacques might be able to answer the question of if this is typical. I think for us it was definitely around demonstrating those two technologies.
No, we've seen that combination before. One of the projects I showed at the very beginning, the one with the photovoltaic field and the storage in New Mexico, that had a combination of two different lead-acid batteries, a regular lead-acid battery and a super battery that respond in different ways. So, particularly when you pair up a power battery with an energy battery, it's a good combination, and you hit more value streams that way.
Very good. A couple other questions about the batteries. How are the battery full life cycle issues addressed?
So for when we worked with Dynapower, it's one of the things we explore is what do we expect? How do we bake into a cost analysis the life cycles? And each technology has different characteristics from a life cycle standpoint, and it really comes down to how many cycles you run these batteries through, how often, how deep of a charge, discharge. In our sort of setup, we assume roughly from an 8 to 12 year time period, depending again on how much they're used, that we would be starting to replace cells in the system. And again, it can vary by temperature in the area, just how often they're used. In our solar project, we assume we have a 20 or 25 year life there. So we essentially say, for the life of the solar, we're going to have to replace the cells one time in the middle of that.
Okay, great. And can you go into more detail on how you calculated the 4 megawatt power and 3.4 megawatt hour energy capacity respectively for the battery storage? What are the parameters you considered to come up with these numbers?
Well, to be totally frank, one of the specs is physical space, right? So one of the things we're looking at is, okay, how much room do we have? We do look at, all right, what's the size of the solar project, being 2 megawatts. As far as the ratio of the capacity to the energy, Dr. Jacques might be able to speak to that a little better. That when we get the information from Dynapower, they basically looked at, all right, what are we looking to get here? Here's what you can get for capacity from lithium ion. Here's its equivalent energy rating, and the same for the lead acid. And I don't know, Doctor, if you have more insight on that.
Yeah, again, it depends on how you want to run it. You can always change the capacity or the time you run it. If you run it at half capacity, you can run it about twice as long, roughly. There's a factor in there, but we needn't worry about it now. So, for example, if you're going to do if you are in an emergency and you're doing mission critical, you would reduce the flow as much as you can and make it last as long as you can. But the given ratios are sort of standard for that battery setup.
Okay, thank you. We have also a couple of questions about the PV portion of the project, and this is something I confess, when I first heard that Green Mountain Power had so much PV going in to a city in Vermont that it needed energy storage to integrate it onto the distribution grid, I was quite impressed, given that Vermont is not Arizona in terms of insulation. So the questions are, what's the expected annual capacity factor of solar PV in Vermont, and what is the insulation for the site looking like?
So we've seen it again. It really depends on a few things from, are you fixed or tracking? How good of a slope are you on, your roof or ground mount? But really, you're anywhere from 13% capacity factor in Vermont up to, I think, as high as 17 or 18 when you're using tracking, full triple axis tracking equipment. Our site, I believe we have forecasted about a 14% capacity factor. That site has a good sort of gentle southerly facing slope. It's all ballast mounted equipment. I can't recall the actual tilt angle, but it's designed to capture more a little bit later in the day as well. So, but we're right around a 14% capacity factor at that location.
I might add to this that in Europe, Germany is the country with the most photovoltaic, somewhat counterintuitive.
Yes, that's been quite interesting, the news coming out of Germany the past couple of years. Okay, and back to the storage. The question is, was there any consideration of emerging technologies, for example, flow batteries, in the initial design? And if not, why?
Sure. So for us, I mean, this was really about speed of a project. I know when working with Dynapower, we wanted to move, and working with the department and DOE, we wanted to move fairly quickly. Dynapower has the most familiarity and experience with these types of technologies. We knew we could move this one along more quickly than a different technology or flow at this point. So it was definitely around familiarity with a system. The Dynapower system can already integrate with these types of technologies, and that's what we chose to move forward with.
Yeah, and I can add that whereas I would very much like to see flow batteries, for example, or other advanced batteries be introduced into the States. It doesn't have to be all the time. Our Washington project has a very nice vanadium flow battery.
Right. So the purpose is not simply to demonstrate new technology. It's to demonstrate new technology that actually fits with the needs of the application. Okay, here's a good question for Dr. Jacques. What efforts is DOE undertaking at the state level to understand and break down regulatory barriers toward electrochemical storage deployments?
Well, actually, our main efforts to influence the regulatory picture is precisely by supporting the development of projects, because it's the projects that will point out the need for changes in regulatory setups, tariffs, rebates, what have you. So we don't actually have a regulatory function. That's FERC.
And maybe we can elaborate on that a little bit. To what extent is FERC responsive to this type of project in terms of reviewing regulations or revising regulations in response to advances in technology and applications?
Well, I don't know whether this particular project will have a major role in changes, but it will certainly be considered, and FERC's record of being aware of storage technologies and acting fairly fast is impressive.
Okay. So we still have questions remaining, and questions are still coming in, but it's almost 20 minutes after 2, and my powers to stretch time are limited, so I think we're going to have to bring this webinar to a close. Are there any final statements, observations, or comments that either of our remaining guests would like to make?
Well, I would like to say that it's been fantastic working with Vermont, the state, the utility, and Dynapower, and I think it's an excellent project from my point of view.
Yeah, Todd, and I'll just echo that. I mean, thank you, big thank you to you, Todd, to Dr. Jacques, to the department. Mary said it a few times, which is strategic partnerships are key, and it's critical that you have buy-in from your local community, from your state, your regulators, to get this type of innovation done and moving. That's critical. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much to both of you and to our other presenters. We have again on the screen the URLs for our ESTAP website, our webinar archive, our listserv, and we also have email addresses for myself and the project director from Sandia, Dan Borneo. If anybody has questions, would like more information, please feel free to contact me. And with that, I will pass it back to Samantha to wrap this up.